If the New Orleans Saints feel like addressing wide receiver in this year's NFL draft, there's a pair of former Tennessee Volunteers that could keep the Tennessee to New Orleans pipeline going strong. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss the newest episodes every single Monday through Friday. And I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, over at Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, and of course here with you every Tuesday on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at another midweek mock draft, as we do often here on Wednesdays. You said you wanted it, so you got it coming for you. This time we're going to take a look at why the Saints should consider packaging and trading, especially those day 3 picks, in order to start to move up elsewhere in the draft. We'll also take a look at how the New Orleans Saints could still sign tight end Foster Moreau, who they helped with a potentially life-saving diagnosis of Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that some of the sort of parameters are already in motion to get that done. But first, the New Orleans Saints have consistently reinvested in not only the Ohio State Buckeyes pipeline to their franchise, but also the Tennessee Volunteers pipeline to their franchise. You look back at players like Taylor Stallworth, you think about Shai Tuttle, Alvin Kamara, Alante Taylor, and many more. Even wide receiver coach Kodi Burns is a former Tennessee Volunteers wide receiver coach. The Saints love that program, and they have already started to have conversations with, and they had a top 30 visit with Hendon Hooker, the Tennessee Volunteers quarterback. But what if the conversation with Hendon Hooker and the top 30 visit with Hendon Hooker wasn't actually about Hendon Hooker at all? What if it was instead about the pair of wide receivers that the Tennessee Volunteers fielded last year in Jalin Hyatt and Cedric Tillman? Now, Kodi Burns, the New Orleans Saints wide receivers coach, has experience with both of these receivers, a little bit more so Cedric Tillman, but does have experience with both. And if you remember back to the Combine, the clip that I shared, it's actually still a YouTube short of mine over on the YouTube page, of Hendon Hooker kind of discussing his relationship with Kodi Burns. And one of the things that he mentioned was that Burns had actually implemented some of the plays that Tennessee has been running over the last couple of years that have worked out well for them. And a lot of that comes from what that Tennessee offense does with its wide receivers. So would not be surprising if the Saints, who love the Tennessee Volunteers system, love the Tennessee Volunteers pedigree, also now with Cody Wilson in the building as their wide receivers coach, would be interested in these wide receivers coming out of the Volunteers program. So let's highlight both of these players. Jalin Hyatt, who is on his way to New Orleans for a top 30 visit this week. He comes in at 6 foot, 176 pounds, so a little bit undersized, particularly in terms of weight. You think back to last year's first round draft pick, Chris Olave, was also around 6 foot, but came in at least in the 180s. And so Jalin Hyatt would need to put on a little bit more weight to kind of be within the New Orleans Saints prototype, but certainly sitting at 176, he's not that far off. We're talking 8 pounds, maybe a little bit more, because remember, Chris Olave also went away from his rookie season saying, yeah, I'm going to see if I can bulk up and add a little bit of weight as well. He jumped a 40-inch vertical, which is really, really good. An 11 foot 3-inch broad jump, also really good. So he's got a ton of explosion. You look at his 4.4 40, which ranks very high in terms of like RAS scores and all of those other things. Speaking of his RAS score, 9.49. So he's in that Saints threshold as well. And he's somebody that has had a lot of success in that Tennessee system, which is very wide receiver heavy and does require you to do a lot of things as a wide receiver, be able to read and react to leverages of defenders, make the right choice when it comes to what a cornerback is doing, see the field the same way that the quarterback sees the field. And he did all of that to the tune of 67 receptions, 1,267 yards, and 15 receiving touchdowns in 2022. So he certainly has the numbers to back up the measurables and has the tape in terms of the on-field ability to be able to read, react, do everything that Tennessee Volunteers system asked him to do. Now, he's not the only one. And in fact, there's another wide receiver in Cedric Tillman who has really good athletic scores, but maybe checks the boxes for the size of wide receiver you think the New Orleans Saints might be interested in. 6'3", 213 pounds, very well within the New Orleans Saints prototype. 37-inch vertical leap, 10-foot, 8-inch broad jump. Those are really, really spectacular numbers as well. Not too far behind Jalin Hyatt, who is, nearly 40 pounds lighter than Cedric Tillman and 3 inches shorter than Cedric Tillman, so really good. Ran a 4.54 in terms of his 40-yard dash. I know we love to glorify the 4.4s and the 4.3s and things like that, but 4.5 is no slouch, especially when you're 6'3", 213 pounds. And in fact, when you are that big, I don't necessarily need you to run in the 4.4s. Just let me know you can go up and get it. And a 37-inch vertical definitely helps with that. In 2022, he had a little bit of, he had a half season effectively. He only played in 6 games, but during those 6 games, 37 receptions, 417 yards, and 3 touchdowns. When Kodi Burns was with him in 2021 in Tennessee, 64 catches, 1,081 yards, and 12 total touchdowns there. So that's what I mean by Cedric Tillman and Kodi Burns have like a little bit more of a connection with one another than maybe Jalin Hyatt does, because Cedric Tillman's best season came with Kodi Burns in the building. Jalin Hyatt's came the year after Kodi Burns had left. So I think you look at size, you look at the connection to the wide receiver coach, and then you look at just the system and the Volunteers to Saints pipeline that we see over and over again on both sides of the ball. There's a lot of reason to be excited about a guy like Cedric Tillman, who could potentially be there in the 2nd or 3rd round for a selection for the New Orleans Saints. And even grabbing him at 71 would be absolutely spectacular. He could go earlier than that, who knows? But I mean, you look at both of these guys, and they're both very close in terms of the thresholds that you're looking for in terms of the prototype to the Saints. Again, Hyatt coming in a little bit light in terms of weight, but not far away from where Chris Olave was last year. Cedric Tillman checks a little bit more of the boxes, but maybe doesn't have the speed. But which one do you feel like you need more in this offense? I dare say the 6'3", 213 pounder, with Michael Thomas coming off of injury, and with Bryan Edwards, we're not necessarily super sure what he's going to be in the New Orleans Saints offense. Having another player of that style, of that mold, of that fit makes a ton of sense for the New Orleans Saints. And honestly, as for Jalin Hyatt, he could potentially very quickly get out of the Saints' reach. I mean, this is a guy that has some 1st-round conversation around him because of the explosive nature of his style of play, but the Saints picking at 29 and 40 might be just barely outside of where he might land in terms of the end of the 1st round, top of the 2nd round, or potentially if he falls to 40, what are the other needs? Who are the other players on the board? It might be tough to justify taking a wide receiver in the 2nd round when you're looking at building your defensive line. You might have a star running back that you can grab there. You might look for an edge rusher at that position, things like that. So there's an interesting sort of situation there, especially between 40 and 71, where the Saints could potentially grab a guy like Jalin Hyatt, but based upon who else is on the board in those top 40 selections, it might be hard to justify it. So for the Saints, either trading back up from 71 or waiting until 71 and potentially grabbing Tillman could be a part of what helps to make the decision for New Orleans when it comes to adding that wide receiver, should they decide to add one of the 2 Tennessee Volunteers. Coming up next, though, that's not the only way that the New Orleans Saints could potentially add a weapon, even one that might not be available in Week 1. We'll tell you how the New Orleans Saints could potentially still sign Foster Moreau, despite the life-changing diagnosis and news that he got with his first physical with New Orleans. We got all that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are nearly here. Will the New Orleans Pelicans make it? So far, so good. And they can, maybe by the time you're watching this, actually even lock up a play-in tournament game. So you'll want to keep up with all of that. But this is also the perfect time for you to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. America's #1 sportsbook, and that app, super safe, super secure, super easy to use. And if you're a new customer, you're going to get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets that you get back if your first bet doesn't win. So make sure you check them out today. Plus, FanDuel offers you the opportunity to combine a bunch of different bets, including money line, point scores, threes drain, things like that, into a bigger payout in same game parlays. But make sure you don't miss out your chance on that no sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets by going to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Could the New Orleans Saints still sign former Raiders tight end and former teammate of now quarterback Derek Carr, Foster Moreau, despite the life-changing diagnosis that he received when he came in for his physical here in New Orleans? Got that for you here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. So it was reported today through John Sigler, who also was looking at it through the NFL's transaction wire that goes out each day, that the Saints had another facility visit with former Raiders tight end Foster Moreau. Now, you remember just a few weeks ago, the Saints brought him in to the facility. They did a routine physical with him. And in the midst of that routine checkup, they found that he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. This is now the third or fourth time since 2017 that the Saints bring a player in for a routine physical checkup and end up potentially saving that player's life. You might think back to things like Nick Fairley back in 2017, John Dornbross not too long ago, all of that. Now you add Foster Moreau to that list, and things look like, well, maybe the Saints might have been interested in him, but after that diagnosis, the doors probably closed, and now like Foster Moreau will go away for a year, work on fighting and combating that Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis, and then potentially come back to football at a later time. Well, perhaps that time can be pre-arranged, and there's a way to do that if you're the New Orleans Saints. So this comes from John Hendricks, one of my new teammates over at the Saints News Network with Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation. You can follow him on Twitter at John J. Hendricks, who says the following: Foster Moreau is completing the physical that he started the first time with the Saints, he's told. So that's a per sources situation there. So what that means is that Foster Moreau went back on Tuesday, on April 4th, to finish the physical that didn't end, that didn't get finished the first time because they found that diagnosis. And so the outlook here for Foster Moreau, as John puts in his tweet here, is that it's a matter of when he'll play again, not necessarily if he'll play again. So this is all about getting ready for Foster Moreau to still be back on the football field sooner rather than later. And there's also some reports that say, and this also came from Foster Moreau himself, that he sees himself potentially being cleared mid-season. So how could the New Orleans Saints get in on this? Well, one way that they could do that is actually sign him. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Ross, why would you sign somebody that's going to miss a year of football or half a year of football? How do you end up maintaining that in terms of roster spots, all those other things? So there's a list that the team could add him to called the non-football injury list. This is the type of list that you add a player to when they, think back to Noah Spence years ago. It wasn't during organized team activities. He was getting ready for offseason activities on his own, doing his own training away from the facility, and ended up with an ACL tear, and then went on the non-football injury list and never came off because it was a full year injury, right, with that ACL tear. So if you have an injury away from something that is organized by the NFL, training camp, OTAs, mini camps, games, preseason, things like that, practices, if you have something that's away from all of that, even if it's football related, it's considered a non-football injury because it didn't happen around something sanctioned by the NFL. So for Foster Moreau, although the visit is an NFL mechanism, it's not a practice. It's not something active. So, and of course, it's not like it was an injury that took place during his physical. The old Tyrod Taylor getting stabbed in the lung with an injection type thing with the Chargers years ago. It's not that. It's that it was something that was pre-existing that the Saints happened to diagnose. They happened to find in that checkup. So they could add him to the non-football injury list since he is eligible for that. And then after the first 4 games of the year, they could kind of wait and see how things go. And if he's cleared, after the first 4 games of the season, they could actually bring him back to the roster. And this wouldn't hurt them salary-wise either, because players on the non-football injury list are not guaranteed their salaries. Now, they can negotiate a payment while they're on the list with the team, and the New Orleans Saints are the type of team who would do something like that, especially with Foster Moreau dealing with what he's dealing with, him being a hometown guy, going to Jesuit High School, playing at LSU, all of those things. But this could be a really nifty and crafty way for the Saints to not only get tight end help, but get tight end help with a player that they clearly value because they brought him in for a visit in the first place, that has chemistry with Derek Carr, and that can also potentially get back to the field for you at a very key time. Because starting that week 5, the Saints would have a 5-week window to either have him return to practice, put him on injured reserve, which would effectively end his season, or even release him. And so in that case, if they feel that they have, an idea of when he's going to return, whether it be weeks 5 through 10 or weeks 5 through 9, they could wait all the way to week 9 and then add him back to the roster once he's cleared to play again. If for whatever reason that doesn't happen and he's not cleared to play, they could just put him on injured reserve, end his season officially, and it really doesn't hurt them at all to do that. He doesn't take up a roster spot on the 90 or 53-man rosters as long as he's on the NFL, on the non-football injury list, and it gives the Saints an opportunity to do something, let's just be honest, really cool here, right? Like this guy that is, a son of the city, that is here in New Orleans, that wants a team back up, potentially wants a team back up with his quarterback and Derek Carr, that potentially wants to return home. I think it's indicative that the Saints are interested in him and that he's interested in the Saints, being that he not only showed up for the visit in the first place, but came back to finish that visit after the diagnosis. I think it's not a weird or unwarranted conclusion to draw that he and the Saints are interested in one another, for sure. And so you have the opportunity to do something super dope for a guy that's from here and to bring him back and say, okay, if you're ready during midseason, there's a spot for you. If not, NBD, you go on injured reserve, revisit it before the 2024 season during the offseason. I think that would be a wise move by New Orleans because A, there's absolutely no risk when it comes to it. And B, if you're able to get into week 9, week 10 and add Foster Moreau to your roster, that's a pretty good situation to be in. Now, obviously, it would take a little bit of time for him to get back into rhythm after missing all those games and everything. That's totally fine because you've got Juwan Johnson, you've got Adam Troutman, you've got Taysom Hill. You could still draft a tight end, but to be able to get him into the fold there, especially if you deal with any injuries at the position, would be absolutely outstanding. And again, just kind of super cool, like a cool thing to do for a guy that's from your city. All right, coming up next. I asked if you wanted a midweek mock draft. You told me yes. I asked if you would trade up in the first round. You gave me a resounding no. So let's stand pat at 29, but trade up in and from day 3 and see what we can add to this New Orleans Saints team. I think you might like the way that this goes. Got that coming up for you as we continue on a wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our midweek mock draft. You said you wanted a midweek mock draft. We got it for you. You said you didn't want to trade up in round 1, so we didn't do that. And we also didn't trade back because, again, the Saints haven't done it since 2007. It's a fun scenario to explore, and maybe it'll happen for the first time in forever here in 2023, but let's not keep revisiting it too much, shall we? So instead, we're gonna focus on standing pat early, but trading up late to try to get a few more selections. So I'm going to bring up the mock draft here on the video side so that you can all see it. Let me not take my name away. Let me actually bring up the mock draft. But to go through it all, let's list it all out first, and then I'll go through and go pick by pick. So at 29, stood pat there. Was kind of hoping that maybe a certain player would fall or something like that, but with who was left on the board, Mozzie Smith, the interior defensive lineman from Michigan, continues to make a lot of sense for the Saints there. At pick 40, Luke Musgrave, the tight end out of Oregon State, was available, so I drafted him. This was before the Foster Moreau news broke, but I still don't think that drafting a rookie tight end is a bad idea as long as you don't draft one in the first round. At round 3, pick 71, I was hoping I'd be able to grab Cedric Tillman here, but he was already gone just to kind of like live in the the moment of today's episode, but he was already gone. Know that he would have been a selection there. Instead, I went with SMU wide receiver Rashee Rice, who I'm not mad at all. And then, because of some moving around and some trading, this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. So instead of me waiting around until pick 115 in the 4th round, I decided that I was going to trade up and get a second, 3rd round pick. So the way that I did that is that I traded away the 4th round pick, 115, and also one of my 2 5th round picks, the later of the 2 at 165 to move up to 101. That put me in a really good and honestly realistic position to draft Tyjae Spears. There's a lot of times where I can grab him in these mock draft simulators, which, look, there's meta in all of these things. There's ways where you can completely predict exactly what you're going to get, and you can do certain things like make it super random and all that, but then it gets way unrealistic and everything. But I could have sat around to 115 on most of these mock draft simulators and still grab Tyjae Spears. I think he's a top 100 guy. So at least this feels a little bit more realistic that I moved up to get him at 101. That might be what it takes for the New Orleans Saints to get a Tyjae Spears in particular, maybe even moving up, higher or earlier, but this at least feels a little bit more realistic. Then, instead of waiting around until from 101 to 146, I traded 146 and my later of the 2 7th round picks, along with next year's 6th, knowing that I'm in line for another compensatory one there, and I already had 2 6th round picks in 2024 anyway, in order to move up to 123 in the 4th round. So I still got picks in round 1, round 2, round 3, got 2 of those, and in round 4. And for me to do that, or the player that I ended up selecting there was again Viliami Fehoko, the edge rusher out of San Jose State, who I'm liking more and more and more. 20 plus sacks over the course of his career, 40 plus tackles for a loss, 12 passes defense, 5 forced fumbles. This guy is really, really disruptive, has a lot of talent. Probably needs to, you're looking for the athletic profile to get there a little bit more, but the size is there. All the other things are there as well. And then at pick 227, which was just the first of the Saints' original 7th round selections, I just kind of stood pat there. I went with Caleb Chandler, the guard out of Louisville, who hasn't allowed a sack in either of the last 2 years, 290 plus pounds, 6'3", good size to just have there. Most of his career playing left guard. So just good to continue to add depth to the offensive line. Whether or not he makes the roster, we'll see. But in this scenario, I'm in the 7th round here, so I want to go and grab somebody that has shown you that they have some production. In particular, he's really good, particularly good in the passing game as a pass blocker, which on the interior is a little bit more important to me right now, especially with a new quarterback in the system. So let's break all of it down a little bit further here. We'll go back up to Mazi Smith, the interior defensive lineman out of Michigan. So the reason why I ended up going with him is because he just gives you a little bit of all around on everything that it is that you're looking for. He's disruptive in the passing game, can be disruptive immediately up the middle. Quickest and easiest way to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks is right up the middle. You're going to have potentially Baker Mayfield or whomever starting it with one of these teams. You're going to potentially have, or I guess Kyle Trask is the other option there in Tampa. You're going to have a rookie quarterback in Carolina, and you're very likely going to have Desmond Ridder starting for the Atlanta Falcons. And so you have a young quarterback, you got a combination of young quarterbacks and undisciplined quarterbacks in the division right now. And so getting pressure right up the face, right up the middle should be an impact thing for the New Orleans Saints throughout the 2023 season. Plus you want somebody that's going to be able to help you out in the run game. Mazi Smith's really, really good there. Looking at Luke Musgrave, just phenomenally talented and athletic, 6'5", 253 pounds. 36-inch vertical, 4.61 40-yard dash, great times in both the 20 and 10-yard splits as well. So he gives you all of that sort of exciting athleticism while also being a fantastic pass catcher, big-bodied guy, and you can bring him in and allow him to continue to develop. And if he catches on quicker than usual and quicker than most rookie tight ends do, then you get this phenomenal pass-catching trio that you can deploy from tight end with Juwan Johnson, Luke Musgrave, and of course Taysom Hill, although Taysom Hill will be used in a bunch of different places. And maybe you add Foster Moreau to that. Maybe Adam Troutman comes along throughout the year. There's some really, really good opportunity there for you. Rashee Rice, another great wide receiver in this year's class. He was so much fun to watch during the Senior Bowl. 6 foot, 204 pounds. So he doesn't give you the quintessential X size, but he does give you the quintessential X play style. And when I say X, I mean the go-to big-bodied, weak side receiver like a Michael Thomas or something like that. The 41-inch vertical helps a ton, and the 10'8" broad jump helps a ton as well. 4.51, so again, much like Cedric Tillman, he's not blazing fast in terms of that 4.4, 4.3 speed, but gave you great times in terms of his 20-yard split and his 10-yard split as well, which is maybe a little bit more important because you don't necessarily need the long speed. If you're working a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, I want to know how quickly you can move in tight areas and things like that. The next thing is Jalin Hyatt, who I really like in this year's draft. 6'3", 276 pounds, 24 bench reps, 4.77 40-yard dash. Doesn't really have a super impressive athletic profile. His relative athletic score just at 5.31, but still he gives you a lot of production and a lot of traits and good size and all the things that you would be more than willing to try to build off of late in, from after drafting him late in the draft. At 123, where I selected him, I was also looking at Andrew Voorhees, the interior offensive lineman from USC. At 6'6", 310 pounds, and 38 bench reps, he is, say it with me, strong. That boy is strong. So I do like what he brings. I mean, 38 bench reps is absolutely insane. He's also got pretty good, explosive traits as well. 29-inch vertical, 8'9" broad jump. Not amazing, but not bad by any stretch of the imagination. And so maybe that's a name that I could have gone with and then maybe taken a 7th round edge rusher or package that 7th round selection with a future, 5th or a future 4th to be able to try to move up into the 6th round or even late in the 5th round to grab, an edge rusher there or something like that. I might try to do that again. Some similar trades to this, but instead of keeping that random 7th round pick, seeing if there's some value in terms of trading up into the 5th round and getting the bottom of that draft, instead of it being at 227, I took Jalin Hyatt at 123 in the 4th round. Can my last selection be a 5th round pick and get somebody that comes in and helps? And maybe it's Jalin Hyatt instead, right? Like maybe he's the guy that I draft in the 5th round and then take Andrew Voorhees in the 4th round. So I'll try to do some more like this where we're moving up and moving around with those day 3 picks, because I do think that can be the best way for the Saints to get the best bang for their buck, if you will. 8 selections in this year's draft, but as I've been saying over and over again, don't expect the Saints to walk in with 8 picks and leave with 8 players. Saints haven't drafted 8 players in a draft for the last 7 years, but them walking in with 8 selections and walking out with 6 players feels very much like something the New Orleans Saints would do. But I agree with the many of you that chimed in that trading up in the 1st round probably less ideal than either trading back, which we know is a long shot, or trading up out of or in different parts of the bottom of the draft. Get out of the top, get inside the top 200, get outside of all of that 200 later selections, get up and get into the top 150, do all those types of moves. So we'll continue to explore with that and play around with that here as the weeks move on very quickly here toward the NFL draft. So I hope you enjoyed that. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, it is Thursday, so we're going to dive into some more draft prospects. We looked at linebackers as our specific focus last week. Let's take a look at some more of these other wide receivers that could potentially be of interest to the New Orleans Saints, and who's the best fit at running back for New Orleans. It's also going to be your question of the day today, so please feel free to chime in. Who's the best running back fit in this year's draft for the New Orleans Saints? Do you go for the big power guys? Do you go for an all-around guy? Or do you go for the Alvin Kamara type players like Jahmyr Gibbs and Israel Abanikanda and so on and so forth that could do, that are fantastic in the passing game, but can also, give you what you're looking for in the run game as well. So a whole bunch coming up for you as we continue on and continue to just have so much fun here on Locked On Saints. Don't forget to join the subtext as well. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSaints to get exclusive content as well as one-on-one conversations with me. Make sure you're following along with Saints News Network, the new home for all of my written work as well. Should have my first piece out late this week, and then much, much more here on Locked On Saints as well. So I appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dude, showing you what it is that New Orleans Saints teams, that NFL teams think about when it comes to building up their team and building a successful NFL franchise. Got it all for you every single Monday through Friday on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Appreciate you as always, making me part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.